Hi guys, Dr. Rachel Hippolyte here. So today we're going to talk about diagnosis, okay, and what is good about a diagnosis and then what's not so good about a diagnosis. And the one thing that I notice with clients when they do come to work with me, who a lot of them have multiple diagnoses, the one mistake they make with that diagnosis. Okay, so diagnosis can be in mental health, it can be anything from OCD to generalized anxiety disorder to depression to eating disorders. So those diagnoses are based on a cluster of symptoms, and then you're given a diagnosis, and then the aim is to then get treatment, okay? Having a diagnosis is great initially because it allows you to recognize, hang on, there is something wrong, and therefore, how do I fix it? But one of the problems that some of my clients suffer with is that they've got that diagnosis, and then that diagnosis becomes them. It literally becomes part of their identity. And when it is part of your identity, it's actually incredibly hard to let go, because when something is part of you, you can't just let it go without being something else. Your identity is so important. Okay, and so especially when clients have had these diagnoses for years and years and years and maybe haven't had improvement with talk therapy, they haven't had improvement with medication, and they're still suffering, that's the one mistake that I find that they make. Okay, one, they're using a diagnosis as part of their identity. Subconsciously, not consciously. Consciously, they want to get better, but subconsciously, their brain is getting a secondary gain to keeping that diagnosis. It is part of them. And the second one is that they use that diagnosis to rely on others to fix them. So when meds don't work, it means that they're never going to get better. When talk therapy doesn't work, it means that they're never going to get better. And then the longer that they have it, the more that diagnosis becomes part of their identity, and the harder it is to get rid of the negative connotation with that diagnosis. Okay, so that's the good thing about a diagnosis, is that it allows you to realize something's wrong. But the bad thing is when you keep it without using that diagnosis to work out how can I get better. So remember, every diagnosis that I mentioned earlier is actually just a dysfunction in the brain. It'll be a different brain pattern, an overactive part of the brain and maybe an underactive part of the brain. And then they give you the symptoms and the behaviors which then give you that diagnosis, okay? But it is all down to brain health. When your brain isn't healthy, your mind isn't healthy, okay? And that's when we get the symptoms of mental health problems. So what I want you to recognize, even if you have these diagnoses, is to recognize that it is a brain disorder and that you can heal it. Okay, you can rely on doctors, on therapists, on psychiatrists to help you heal it, but not to do it for you. And that is the mistake that I find, is that mental health diagnosis almost disempowers people to recognize that it's their brain and they can heal it themselves, and they need to put things into place to be able to heal their brain and therefore heal their mind and therefore heal their life. Okay, so always use a diagnosis as a positive. Use it that it's a brain dysfunction, that your brain isn't healthy, but what do you need to do to make changes to make your brain more healthy? And believe me, it's not easy. Those poor patterns of behaviour have occurred over years and years and years. But the brain is an amazing organ. It does heal. It just needs to be looked after. It needs to be taught and it needs to be nurtured. So use your diagnosis to empower you. Use your diagnosis to learn about your brain. Use your diagnosis to say, I am going to heal an organ that is unhealthy and it is my job to do it. Hope that makes sense, guys.